Good morning, students. Today we are going to see about Lesson 4 History, Colonialism, and Tribal Societies. In this lesson, we are going to study about early tribal society in India and tribal society under the British and various tribal revolt against the British. Students, you have already studied about freedom fighters and great leaders who sacrificed their life for our nation freedom. Not only freedom fighters and also Adivasis, the group called as tribals, who fight hard to get their rights and freedoms. They also played a vital role in our nation freedoms. Let's move on to early tribal societies. India is home to a large tribal population. They are some of the oldest people. They were known as Adivasis. Literally, they were known as original inhabitants. History of tribal people. The history of the tribal communities of India in the colonial period can be reconstructed from many resources. Of these, important are government records such as acts, laws, police record, books, novels, and memories of government officials. Not only that, many important information we got from newspaper reports. An important source of history of this period is oral record, passed down and preserved across the generations. These consist of myths, war songs, and poems of liberation composed by the Adivasis. These oral sources are compiled and studied by the scholars known as anthropologists, who studied all forms of human society and culture. Now we will move to tribal society before arrival of British. In hilly area, particularly where shifting culture was practiced, there was no concept of personal ownership of land, and there were no written record of the ownership of land also. As there was no land revenue to be paid, there was no need for them to have written proof of ownership of land also. Now we will move to advent of the British. The arrival of British disturbed the largely self-sufficient community of the tribal people. As a result of the new revenue policies of British, the region that traditionally belonging to the tribal groups came under colonial administration during the second half of the 18th century. This enabled the British to exploit the rich natural resources of the tribal region. Now we will move to tribal society during the colonial period. The British took advantage because in fact that the tribal people had no written record of ownership of land. So the British easily took away their land, mostly forest area and also the hill area. The land was given to Jamindars, who were literally known as outsiders. So the tribal people lost their land and also lost their rights. They were forced to work on agriculture land under the new Jamindars and pay high revenues. To pay the revenue, they often borrowed money from moneylenders at high rate of interest. Now we will discuss about tribal society during the colonial period. When they failed to repay the loan, the burden of debt passed on the next generation. In this way, many tribal families become bonded laborers. Westernization. The British also made several attempts to westernize the tribal people through their activities in the tribal region. Under their influence, many tribal groups were gradually made to leave their traditional culture and the religious beliefs, and they hold the Western ideas and the practices. Next, we will discuss about tribal revolt. The exploitative practice of British led a number of rebellions in the various tribal regions of India. Example, Swar in 1768 in West Bengal, Mal Bahariya in 1772 in Rajmahal Hills, Santhal in 1855 in Jharkhand. Among the rebellion, Santhal rebellion, that is very important rebellion in India. The Santhal people were a dominant tribal community occupying large area of land in present day of Jharkhand. With the introduction of the permanent settlement of 1793 in these regions, Santhal lost their land to the British and became compelled to pay the heavy taxes to them. They were forced to approach the newly arrived moneylenders in the region for loan. Soon they became a burden with the heavy debt to British and moneylenders and also the Jamindars. Another one important causes of Santhal rebellion was the increase of presence of missionaries in the Santhal region. Tilka Manchi was among the first of Santhal to rise in revolt against the British in 18th century. He formed a liberation group with the Bahariya people, but he was killed shortly after. In June 1855, the Santhal once again rose in revolt against their oppressors. Over 10,000 Santhals armed with the bows, arrows, spears and assembled in the village and attacked and killed many jamindars, moneylenders, traders, police and revenue officials. Initially, the British did not realize the measures of revolt and sent a small army to suppress it. By the time the Santhals had succeeded in capturing large area of land and extending from Bahalpur to Birham. Final result of Santhal rebellion. The revolt was eventually, which means finally, crushed, and the leaders captured and killed the rebellions. But the final result of Santhal rebellion came up with a solution. Thus, the British passed the Santhal Pargana Tenancy Act. Next, we will discuss about Munda Ulgulan. The Mundas people were prominent tribal groups in the Bihar and Jharkhand region. Before the coming of British, they functioned as a traditional clearers of forest land of this area. With the advent of British, their land passed into the hands of non-tribal jamindars, and the people were compelled to pay the rent to jamindars. If they failed, they were evicted from their land and made to work as bonded laborers. This system was known as Bed Bihari or forced labors. Birsa Munda. The most important of these rebellions took place in the 19th century. This was led by Birsa Munda. He was a young tribal leader and he was very boldly challenged the British activities. And from young age, he was deeply influenced by the Munda tribal chieftain who resisted the British activities in their region. Over the year, he urged, which means support. He support the people to fight their rights and resist Bed Bihari system and also reclaim ownership of the land. He quickly gained a following among the Munda and came to be looked upon as a godly figure with divine power. Birsa led a lot of rebellions against the British in the 1890s. He also launched a guerrilla attack on British. Under Birsa's leadership, more people joined the rebellion. They openly defied the British authorities, stopped paying the rent, and refused to perform the Bidbihari. They also attacked and killed jamindars and missionaries and also the officials. Birsa was jailed in 1900 where he was died. As a result of the Birsa rebellion, Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act of 1908 was passed. Let us discuss about tribal rebellion in northeast India. Various tribal communities settled in northeast India also rose in rebellion against the oppressive practice of the British and Indian jamindars. The tribes of Liskai Hills were spread over the large area that include Mizoram and Assam in India. And another one tribal people, the Khasi people, they were also a tribal community, lived between the Jainita and Gagro Hills in Meghalaya. This region was organized into numerous divisions under the different leaders of rebellion. To add their troubles, the British imposed several taxes on the tribal communities. Finally, in 1862, the Khasi, under the leadership of U. Kihang Nagba, made a lot of revolt against the British. This rebellion went on for about 4 years, but the Khasi leaders were captured one by one. In 1833, the last Khasi leader also captured and forced to surrender. Several other tribal groups from the region such as the Singho, the Naha, Kuki also rebelled against the British in the 19th century. However, all the revolts were crushed within a short period of time. These tribal rebellions are considered to be a precursors, which means pioneer, to the freedom movement in India. Okay, thank you, students.